Thank you for joining me. I'm Gord Long. A reminder before we begin, do not trade from any of these slides. They are commentary for educational and discussion purposes only. Always consult a professional financial advisor before making any investment decisions. In this year's second Under the Lens video, I'd like to continue as a part 2 to our first video. In part 1, we outlined the evolving key macroeconomic problems. In this session, we want to discuss the general global response to those problems, the ramification of those responses, and the regime change it is currently manifesting. I finished the first part with this slide, where I may have startled some of our new viewers that we are on our way to the effective nationalization of financial markets. I laid out that roadmap in the March 2020 Under the Lens video, which I'll come back to later in our discussion today. What I hope you will come to appreciate is that global central planning is increasing and why, and the effective nationalization of financial markets has begun and how. These are the real macroeconomic issues facing investors today. We'll get to those issues by first looking at the responses we've been witnessing to the global problems outlined in part 1. This chart is a little busy, but it illustrates that since the peak levels of interest rates in 1980, the U.S. had the economic luxury of 40 years of continuously falling interest rates at its back. The falling rates hid the fact that growth in population and energy consumption per capita began falling and was substituted with debt increases. Total financial returns were maintained by falling corporate costs via reduced cost of capital and shrinking wage and benefit growth, increasing consumption through consumer debt, and by government debt to fund transfer payments to pay for consumption and reduce corporate risk premiums. Capital mutated to creditism as savings and productive investments were substituted by credit for consumption. The result has been a camouflaged declining standard of living for the average American. Developed economies, as a consequence, are living in a world of artificial economic growth. We laid this out in the 2017 thesis paper, Illusion of Growth, where we showed how exploding government debt is then, through transfer payments, distorting consumption and foreign investment in the GDP formula. This, along with a statistically absurd deflator, makes the GDP growth a meaningless measure of economic activity. National central bank policies have been complicit in this illusion through what can only be termed monetary malpractice. The moral hazard and unintended consequences of reactive kick-the-can-down-the-road policies have led to dysfunctional markets that by design misprices risk and intentionally impedes price discovery. The situation is such that the middle class today has been gutted and is a shell of its former self as the driving engine of the real U.S. economy. Corporations can only find real growth in the untapped consumption of emerging and third world countries. This has failed to materialize fast enough, resulting in a relentless focus on corporate cost reduction. It cannot be stressed strong enough that ubiquitous cost-saving robotics and artificial intelligence will accelerate and devastate employment in the not-too-distant future. As Henry Ford said, the reason he paid high salaries was so his employees could afford one of his horseless carriages. Those days of self-sufficiency are long gone, as the Davos globalists now see UBI, or Universal Basic Income, as the only solution where governments supply the money, not employers. The financing of universal basic income, or what may be better termed as global welfare, is a hidden driver of unfolding central policy planning. The ramifications of this and other macroeconomic responses are going to be the hard realities of a new world order, a new multipolar world order, which we outlined in our 2018 thesis paper, A New World Order. The most obvious ramification of global policy responses can be seen in the current financial markets. We are witnessing the biggest speculative blow-off in history. The prior historic bubbles of the dot-com bubble and the financial crisis don't even compare. As the long-term megaphone pattern in the top left corner illustrates, and which we discussed in its fractal nature in the last long wave video, we are nearing the end of the debt supercycle. Before we leave this slide, note how market volumes have steadily diverged from the rising prices, How can that be, and for such an extended period of time? One of the reasons is due to shrinking stock pools. We explored this in detail in 2018 in the April long-wave video entitled The Disappearing Float Pool, where we suggested a melt-up was to be expected. The slide in stock volumes is evident almost everywhere you look. Even the recent surge in commodity stocks, as represented by Rio Tinto, just as an example only, show exploding prices, yet with the smallest volumes in their history. But it isn't only volume. It is momentum and breadth as shown at the bottom here of the S&P 500 and other oscillators and indicators. The markets are now the purview of the algos, shenanigans, and trickery, the likes of which we most recently saw with GameStop. The congressional hearings were a charade as markets go unpoliced by lax and corrupt regulators. My point is not corruption, but rather the powers to be must keep financial markets from collapsing under their own weight at any cost, even though it was their policies that it wrought. The ramifications would simply be too devastating to fully appreciate, or governments to counter, without potential fallout being a decade-long economic depression. But it's not only a matter of fragile and exposed markets which have become disconnected from underlying economics. It is the economics itself. As we outlined in last year's October Under the Lens video, we have ever-expanding levels of inflation plus deflation occurring simultaneously, but in different economic areas and in different stages. Though the markets only recently have become nervous about inflation, we'll soon be talking about a deflationary shock, and after that, the possibilities of hyperinflation. We have stretched our monetary policies during the COVID-19 pandemic to initiate approaches the Federal Reserve has never before contemplated. They are untested, and as a result, there will be unintended consequences and moral hazard minimally. How will the powers to be handle the coming, looming problems of a global recession, stagflation, liquidity versus solvency concerns, as over 20% of global corporations are already zombies, a potential global depression? The answer is regime change, and that is what we are seeing occurring now. Regime change comes in many forms, but the most evident is policy changes in matters of monetary policy and fiscal policy. We've talked about these specifically in prior videos, most recently in the May Under the Lens video entitled Regime Change. However, it comes in the form of broader public policy changes also. These changes we see to be quite profound. We discussed a lot of directional changes in the just released 2021 thesis paper entitled Social Suppression. The social policy changes are expected to push further restrictions of personal and economic freedom. On the table of contents for the thesis papers, as shown in the red highlighted box, we spent a lot of time outlining how a long list of major long-term cycles are pointing to this now occurring. For example, the well-published Fourth Turning. What is getting little press is the ramifications of the recently issued 57 executive orders by the Biden-Harris regime. These undebated orders are going to have unprecedented and profound impact to the U.S. economy. The purpose of this video is not to break those orders down, but to warn you that the U.S. economy is going to change in a major way as a result. And this is what's important to you as an investor. Oil prices are already telling you that, as well as quickly rising Treasury yields signaling major concerns ahead. We are rapidly moving to an era of increased big controls and big money influence. With this will come increasing social unrest, if it is allowed and not forbidden by the upcoming rollout of the expected Domestic Terrorism Act. As we outlined in the December macro analytics video, we the people are losing our voice to a censoring media, party backroom politics by the political class, and an unelected government bureaucracy. The Great Reset, which we featured in our December Under the Lens video, is now being implemented globally by what I have referred to as the Davos elite. Their coordinated global public policy prescriptions will soon be felt by all of us. These policies, in their own words, will steer the markets, advance shared goals, and harness innovations for social challenges. The Great Reset is the implementation tool we warned was likely to occur in our March Under the Lens video with this roadmap. We felt then we could expect economic stagnation as a direct result of democratic socialism and controlling government policies. That's what we are witnessing. We showed how stimulus spending is no longer the panacea for solving policy mistakes and excess government interference in the economy to stop the harsh realities of the natural selection and cleansing process of capitalism. We can expect these pressures to be unrelenting over the next couple of years. All of this is leading towards and will result in the effect of nationalization of financial markets. It will never be called nationalization. Don't expect that. The Bank of Japan has completely taken over the Japanese bond market and nearly the same on its Nikkei index with its ETF purchases. It has never been called nationalization, but that is what it is. The EU and US is quickly reaching that point in the Treasury bond markets. When the US took over the housing market during the 2008 financial crisis, it wasn't called nationalization. Instead, it was called conservatorship by taking complete control of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the U.S. housing market. Don't be fooled. We nationalized the housing market to stop the crisis. Few even now remember we freed the banks from the realities of mark-to-market for their massive derivative holdings. This allowed them to mark to fantasy and has never been repealed, even 12 years later. To do so is no longer possible. Too big to fail has morphed into something else. I'll leave you to label it. The popular, liberally advocated policy of modern monetary theory, or MMT, is nothing more than the monetization of debt, and it is next up on the agenda. All of this won't end well if history is any indication. It doesn't mean that the world is coming to an end. However, a global depression is not out of the realm of possibility in our lifetime if global policy prescriptions don't get better and fast. As I always remind you in these videos, remember, politicians and central banks will print the money to solve any and all problems until such time as no one will take the money or it is of no value. That day is still in the future, so take advantage of the opportunities as they currently exist. Investing is always easier when you know with relative certainty how the powers to be will react. Your chances of success go up dramatically. The powers to be are now effectively trapped by policies of fiat currencies, unsound money, political polarization, and global policy paralysis. I'd like to take a moment as a reminder, do not trade from any of these slides. They are for educational and discussion purposes only. As negative as these comments often are, there's seldom been a better time for investing. However, it requires careful analysis and not following what has traditionally been the true and tried approaches. Do your reading and make sure you have a knowledgeable and well-informed financial advisor. So until we talk again, may 2021 turn out to be an outstanding investment year for you and your family. And I sincerely thank you for listening.